Inga Legasova did not seem the least bit nervous about her first ever television interview. She's a successful businesswoman, having run a company for the last 15 years. Necessary and inspiring items on the table include a set of photographs of the main people in her life. In the middle stands this picture of her father.
My dad went to Chernobyl by pure accident.
On April the 26th, 1986, Valery Legasov, deputy head of the Kurchatov Institute of Atomic Energy, was having a dilemma: whether to go to a regular meeting at the office or to take his family outside of Moscow on a warm spring day. That was until he received a distress call which changed his life. Go to Chernobyl, a voice said. Some kind of blast had happened there.
This was exactly 2 years before one of the country's leading scientists was found dead in his Moscow apartment. April the 26th, 1986, workers at the nuclear power plant in Chernobyl, some 100 kilometers from the Ukrainian capital Kiev, performed a technical experiment. They reduced the reactor's output to later bring it to a temporary stop. This exercise was meant to test the security systems. Suddenly they received a call from the energy ministry in Kiev. A woman's voice asked them to return to normal levels so they could deal with evening peak time. The personnel did so, but suddenly the operation went wrong.
They lacked the knowledge about the physics of the reactor. They knew only which buttons to push, but knew nothing about how the reactor worked. The personnel put the reactor into an uncontrollable state.
One of the staff on shift saw something wasn't right, panicked and pushed the emergency stop button. In just 9 seconds, the reactor in the 4th block at the nuclear plant, which held almost 200 tons of radioactive fuel, exploded. It emitted large amounts of radiation into the atmosphere. The wind then carried it further into Europe and Russia. This event changed the course of history, becoming the world's worst man-made disaster. Nobody could tell the extent of the meltdown in the first few hours. In the morning, a special governmental commission was sent to Chernobyl. Representing scientific circles was Valery Legasov, the deputy head of the Kurchatov Institute of Atomic Energy, which created the RBMK nuclear reactor used in Chernobyl. Even though Legasov wasn't a specialist in nuclear reactors, he specialized in chemistry and molecular physics. He was the only high-ranking scientist available at the moment, as the others were on holiday.
He stayed. That's because I was returning from a business trip. And he always took my mother and came to meet me at the airport. But when I landed, I saw my mother was alone, and I didn't recognize her. I asked, "What happened? Are you feeling well?" She replied, "It seems that today we lost our dad."
On his arrival at Chernobyl, Legasov saw a terrifying picture, which he later described in a short interview.
Usually, a nuclear power plant is a building with a pipe which never emits anything. And here, for the first time, I saw a station with a fire raging above it. It made the sky turn purple.
From the very beginning, Legasov tried to assess what had happened. He tried to determine whether the reactor had been destroyed.
There was a mass hysteria at the site. Everyone thought that the explosion formed a certain cluster, which could operate by itself. And the first calculations suggested that 1/10 of the core was actually working. We said that it would stop working eventually. It can't carry on by itself, but nobody cared to listen to the scientists.
Legasov, alongside members of the commission, boarded a helicopter and hovered 300 meters above the debris. The levels of radiation at that height were very dangerous. But he was there long enough to realize the reactor was gone forever. Valery understood The situation was far more serious than he had been led to believe. He had to make a decision, and fast.
The first thing my father demanded before starting the technical work was that all of the people from the surrounding areas must be evacuated. It may seem hard to believe, but nobody thought about it.
He realized tens of thousands of people had found themselves at the epicenter of a strong radioactive wave.
He said, "We have no time to sign papers. We just need you to accept our decision to evacuate Pripyat completely."
Legasov's plea wasn't instantly met. Moscow did not authorize it straight away.
This was the pattern in the Soviet Union, that in such a perfect society, accidents don't happen. Airplanes do not fall down. There are no explosions in factories, and nuclear power plants work beautifully.
Only 36 hours later did Legasov get what he had asked for. Pripyat and the surrounding areas were evacuated.
I said, "Okay, I give you my approval. Start organizing it immediately." They managed to gather several trains and several thousand buses. And by 2 or 3 p.m. the city of Pripyat was empty. I was told over the phone that there were only dogs left on the streets.
I knew that the town had been evacuated forever. But I couldn't find the moral strength to tell it to the people. Besides, if we told them that they were leaving forever, it would take them quite a while to pack their bags. But the radiation levels were already very dangerous. So we told them it was a temporary move.
But the scientist understood. In just several days, the radiation would reach Kiev, just in time for the Labor Day demonstration on May the 1st. The death toll would be enormous. Legasov insisted the event should not be held, as not to endanger people's lives. Meanwhile, Europe grew suspicious as traces of radiation were detected near Stockholm.
The place where they discovered it was at the Swedish nuclear plant, because the radioactivity was so high, and they thought, "My God, something has happened here." And then gradually they discovered that it had also higher radioactivity in several other places in Sweden. So that was, they understood it was elsewhere.
But Moscow sanctioned an information blockade, concealing the facts from residents, as with the rest of the world. So for the Kremlin, cancelling the May 1st celebrations would mean openly admitting something was wrong.
This was the battle Legasov failed to win. On May the 1st, 1986, just 5 days after the blast, thousands marched here on Krishchatyk, the main street of Kiev, in traditional Labor Day demonstration. It was believed that they exposed themselves to large doses of radiation.
Though officials up to this very day denounced this.
The southwest wind blew radiation clouds towards Belarus and a little towards Russia. Thank God it didn't touch Ukraine.
Another big question at the time was how much of the 200 tons of radioactive fuel had actually stayed inside the reactor.
Nobody can understand how much nuclear fuel had been emitted. Radiation readings at the site were way over the top. And many thought that there was no fuel left inside, and that all of it was in the air. But if all the fuel had been emitted, then it would have been absolutely deadly there, absolutely impossible to work.
The first conclusion, only 3% of the fuel left the core, the rest was still inside. Legasov started to work out how to decrease the radioactive threat coming from the open reactor. His first decision was to bombard it with burr, lead and sand. Helicopters took off with a difficult task. Heat and radiation levels at the height of 200 meters were a critical health risk.
It was very hard to make a helicopter hover in such heat, up to 200 degrees, at a height of 200 meters. That's how hot it was. In the burning heat, helicopters hovered over the exploded reactor. Engineers threw down sacks while the pilots struggled to control the helicopter. After 1 to 2 flights like this, the engineers vomited on landing. The heat, along with the radiation, was too much for them.
Legasov got into an army vehicle and drove directly to the destroyed block, braving strong radiation levels. And more concerns were raised.
When the reactor was on fire, the workers tried to extinguish it with water, so they put tons of water inside. Scientists had a suspicion that if this water was mixed with the heated mass, then there would be a very powerful steam explosion and a lot of radioactive material would again be emitted.
Legasov was also very worried that there could be some serious problems with groundwaters. He thought that the radiation could poison the Pripyat and Dnieper rivers.
Legasov appeared nervous and chain-smoked. But he, just as all of other specialists on the site, couldn't find a solution. Within 10 days, Legasov returned to Moscow. He met the Politburo and described the scale of the situation. But no agreement was reached at the meeting as to what to do next. Legasov made a short stop at home.
He was very tanned.
But this wasn't because of the sun. By that time, he was literally saturated with radiation.
He had no strength to talk, and we felt we shouldn't have asked him anything.
Legasov was almost listless. Inga says he did not even realize that he was in Moscow. Nevertheless, he changed his clothes and went back to Chernobyl.
I think from the very first day, my father knew well what lay ahead of him. When he flew there, hardly anybody understood what had happened. Nobody could explain anything. And I think when he first looked at the destroyed reactor, he understood. His life had ended there.
Meanwhile, as the temperature beneath the reactor's core continued to rise, increasing fears of another blast, a group of volunteers went into the Devil's Mouth, under the glowing reactor, to find out that there was practically no water there. Another explosion could not happen.